Assalamu alaikum. So good to see you.
Wa alaikum salam. It's a pleasure to be here.
My brother, the first thing that I would say to you before we even ask you a question is you created something, a series on Netflix, Who Killed Malcolm X, that might be, or in my estimation, is the finest piece of work done on Malcolm X ever. You advanced our understanding, you pushed our thinking, you opened up possibilities, you actually helped to solve a problem, which is not something we academics usually do. I just want to say, and I've told you this privately, but I want to say publicly that you did something extraordinary and history will smile upon you for that. And I hope you know how valuable that project was for us and to us.
Well, I mean, I really appreciate the compliment, Mark. You should know, and your audience should know, that it was a big team that put this thing together. No project like that can be done. It's no one-man effort. Yes, it is true that my research over many decades into investigating the assassination of Malcolm X was the foundation of the series. But in terms of crafting the series, there was a lot of help. We think Rachel Dretson, Phil Bertelson, Naila Sims, Shayla Harris. There's so many great filmmakers and producers and directors and folks that were on board for that. Six episodes. It was a lot of work. Almost 3 years in production, and I do think that we have made our impact on the culture, on the history. In fact, it did correct the historical record, and we now know for sure who was responsible for pulling the trigger that took out the life of our great brother and our great hero, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz Malcolm X. First time on television that you ever see the face of the principal assassin, the first time in history.
And for those who didn't see the series, since it does belong to history, it's not a spoiler. Can you, who killed Malcolm X?
Malcolm X, in my analysis and what we present in the series, the dirtiest hands in the whole thing is the Nation of Islam, the assassins coming out of the Newark Mosque number 25 in Newark. That's where the hit team was organized and was put together. That's the mosque where they left from that morning to carry it out. And their hands are the dirtiest, the bloodiest, and that's a historical fact that they cannot elude. But secondarily, the New York City Police Department, who knew that Malcolm's life was in danger and just simply refused to protect him. And ultimately, in the final analysis, the United States government that stoked the fires, the embers of hatred against Malcolm through their COINTELPRO dirty tricks. They were bad actors in terms of influencing members of the Nation of Islam to a murderous pitch, and in that regard, they are equally as guilty as well. So it was a confluence, intersection, you may say, of those three entities: the United States government, the New York City Police Department, and in the final analysis, the dirtiest hands in it were the members of the Nation of Islam coming out of Mosque number 25 in Newark, New Jersey.
There are many members of the Nation of Islam who would say that because of the government's involvement and because of the state police, or the New York police, clear involvement, and we see more and more evidence of that every day, that we can't say definitively that the nation as an organization was responsible for the killing of Malcolm X. In other words, members may have done it, and we know some of them, right? But that they weren't doing it at the behest of the nation, but that they were pawns in a government game, that they were pawns in a federal government and New York police game, And at best, the New York police, even if they didn't conspire, they knew exactly who was going to do the killing, as you just said, and they just kind of watched it play out watch the government's plan play out. Why can't that be true?
Well, the people who say this, Mark, are people who were never members of the Nation of Islam or were not part of the broader, shall we say, Sunni Muslim community in general. The Nation of Islam had the most motive to get rid of Malcolm. They had their own reasons that had nothing to do with the government's motives. Malcolm was seen as a traitor, as a Benedict Arnold. He was considered the chief hypocrite, and his blood was made halal or permissible. He was seen as a turncoat, someone who had scandalized Elijah Muhammad, a man that they say, raised him up and made him a international figure. That this was the ultimate betrayal. And, they had very powerful motives. I've interviewed many of these people. I have even interviewed children of the men who carried out the assassination. And they will tell you, many of them get insulted at the suggestion that the government was responsible for Malcolm's assassination. They will tell you, we didn't need any help from the government to kill Malcolm, to assassinate Malcolm. Malcolm, Farrakhan himself said, Malcolm was our traitor. He was our traitor, not yours. And if we dealt with him like a nation deals with a traitor, what the hell business of it is yours?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the leader of the Nation of Islam today, Minister Louis Farrakhan. Those are his words. So go listen to what he says.
Now, of course, just for clarity's sake, he wasn't the leader of the Nation of Islam at that time. He was a minister of a mosque in '65, right? He was he in Harlem at that point?
No, he was in Boston.
Boston. He was in Boston at that point. That's an interesting point, right? So, because Minister Farrakhan has said later that he helped to, he contributed to the climate, that he helped to create the climate that killed Malcolm X. Not that he was calling for the death or was complicit, but that he simply there was an environment that was created. Malcolm spent most of his time in the nation. It was a very short period of time that he was not in the nation. He leaves the nation and then dies by February of '65. Some say he wanted to go back. Some say he was writing letters asking to be put back. When he was silenced and removed, some say he wanted to go back. Again, I'm not asking this to be provocative. I'm really asking for clarity's sake, because I hear competing arguments, and I haven't been in the archive like you have. Tell me why how do we know that Malcolm wasn't actively trying to return to the nation? Because there was a moment where he was certainly trying to get forgiveness from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And there was a moment where he absolutely would have gone back to the nation. Why is that not the final or whole story?
There is a brief period where Malcolm was trying to restore his status in the nation. He had not broken from the nation as yet. He didn't break from the nation until March 8th, 1964. Okay. Right. Pardon me, 64. Yeah, 64. March of 64 is when he broke. Now, there's a clip online where you will see Malcolm with Muhammad Ali outside of the UN, right, meeting the ambassadors and this and that. That is March 6th. Okay, so just 2 days before he formally breaks with the nation, he's seen with Muhammad Ali, right, outside of the United Nations, a member of the Nation of Islam. Okay, he's still in the group, and 2 days later he breaks. In the period between he was silenced, which was right after his speech at the Manhattan Center, December 1st, 1964, okay, 63, pardon me, till the time he left the nation, he was trying to get back. That's true. He loved the nation. He thought it was
Help me understand why. And I'm asking this because, and this is something I've struggled with trying to understand Malcolm's thought process at various moments in his life. Part of why Malcolm leaves is because of the tension. Part of why Malcolm leaves is because of the scandals and the allegations that were circulating. But Malcolm also had a kind of theological awakening, did he not? I mean, there's a moment, even as he's getting to the end of his autobiography, he's starting to talk about the about Master Farad Muhammad. He's starting to talk about Elijah Muhammad's, the idea of him as messenger, the idea of Master Farad Muhammad as a kind of embodiment or God in person, which is the Nation of Islam's theology. If he got to a point where he could question those things, if he got to a point where he was not just socially uncomfortable or emotionally unsettled, but if he actually started to question the doctrine of the nation, why would he want to go back?
Well, there was a lot of reasons. I mean, first
but
and foremost,
you get why that would be, particularly.
No, I've thought about that many times. It's a very good question. Why would he even want to go back if he was having these doubts and what have you? In fact, he had many people in his ear at that time. Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad, had just been released from prison for draft evasion charges. He served a couple of years in prison, and he was at the 1963 Savior's Day, the last one that Malcolm attended. Mm-hmm. Malcolm actually ran that Savior's Day, and at the Savior's Day, he was talking with Wallace. In fact, the following wanted to hear from Wallace, but Wallace had already checked out of the nation. He had already repudiated his father's teachings, and he didn't really want to speak. Malcolm was blamed for preventing Wallace from speaking, especially Elijah Muhammad's children. They blamed Malcolm for, quote unquote, blocking Wallace, not allowing Wallace to speak. But in fact, Wallace Muhammad was in Malcolm's ear. Wallace Muhammad was teaching him or trying to bring him to Orthodox Islam. Malcolm's own sister, Ella Collins, had already, 1959, she had left the nation and she had accepted Orthodox Islam. There were many people, and also the many college students that would approach Malcolm, the Muslim college students who were themselves
Arab Muslims and African Muslims, right?
African Muslims and Arab Muslims, and many white Muslims, Albanians. You know what I'm saying? Syrian, very light-skinned or white-skinned Arabs. And they would tell Malcolm, you're wrong. We're white and we are Muslims. We are not devils. We're just as much Muslim as you or anyone else. And this is the wrong belief. So he was constantly challenged. He was even challenged in 1959, his first visit overseas.
Yep, first time in Palestine, first time, yeah.
Exactly, which is why, by the way, he doesn't write that much about it in his autobiography, because they were challenging him, okay? And it said Malcolm didn't even know how to make salat correctly. He didn't know how to perform the prayers correctly. There's a letter in the Schomburg Center, and their collection, a very fine collection, probably the best in the world, where Malcolm X wrote a letter to Elijah Muhammad. He said, we have to get our prayer game up. We have to teach these people how to pray right.
Let me just take a second for the audience who aren't either Muslim or Malcolm X experts, but you said a couple of things that I think are important. I just want the audience to get some context for it. First thing is, one of the foundational beliefs of the Nation of Islam, as opposed to Sunni Islam, Arab Muslims, what some would say mainstream Orthodox Islam, is just some fundamental differences, right? One is, I'm going to say the issue of Tawheed. Okay, I want to be fair to my brothers in the Nation of Islam who would say that they would say they also believe in Tawheed. There may be competing definitions or ideas about it, but within the global mainstream, Tawheed would be compromised by the Nation of Islam theology, right? So
translate for your audience, Tawheed. What Tawheed means.
Mainstream, the cardinal principle and faith principle of Islam is a belief in the oneness of God, right? The shahadatain, la ilaha illallah, there is no God but Allah. He is alone, wahdahu la sharika lah. He is alone and has no partners. And it's a fairly uncomplicated narrative from the perspective of Sunni Islam. And the idea that God does not have children, God is not, he does not beget, nor was he begotten, which is also a response to the Christian narratives around Jesus. All of this is what Muslims believe. The Nation of Islam, however, has a different theology and theodicy. The Nation of Islam believes, when you listen to their tasmiyah, when you listen to them invoke the name of God or Allah, you know, you'll often hear many members of the Nation of Islam, and it varies on context and person, but they'll often say, instead of saying in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, they will often say in the name of Allah, who appeared in the person of Master Farad Muhammad. And that is a central faith claim of the Nation of Islam and the Nation of Islam teachings and lessons, that God appeared in an embodied form in the person of Master Farad Muhammad on July 4th of 1930. And that moment is the moment where Blacks in America received, as Minister Farrakhan would say, intervention in our affairs. And so that's a very specific faith claim that is very different. So the reason I was asking my dear brother here, Abdur-Rahman, the question was because when we get to Malcolm in 59, that's a long time between 1959 and 1964. If in 59 Malcolm is traveling to Africa, he's traveling to Palestine, that was his first trip there. Muslims in the nation, Elijah Muhammad made Umrah, right? I mean, you know, the lesser Hajj, lesser pilgrimage. So members of the Nation of Islam saw what was happening in the Middle East. They saw what was happening in Saudi Arabia. Malcolm, as you said, was confronted not just by foreign Muslims, but also by Elijah Muhammad's son, saying, hey, Tawheed, the oneness of God, Master Farad Muhammad is not God in the person. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad is not the seal of the prophets or a prophet or a Rasul. The last Rasul, according to Islam, is the Prophet Muhammad, who was born in the year, or born in year 570, right? And receives Quran in 610 and dies in 632. And that becomes the narrative. So my question, and the thing I struggle with Malcolm is, if members of the nation saw all of that and still held on to their faith claims, if Malcolm, who we regard as principled, smart, thorough, sincere, unafraid to change positions, right? He had a certain kind of humility there. If he got all that in 59 and they were working on him in 60 and 61 and 62, why is he still in the nation in 64? I could understand why somebody in the nation would say, maybe they knew something we didn't.
Well, I heard, I knew many of the closest brothers to him. I knew them personally. Brother Benjamin 2X Kareem. Some of these brothers I actually shared the platform with. James 67X Warden, who went on to be known as James 67X Shabazz,
yes,
who left his life as Abdullah Abdul Razak, who was Malcolm's, he called himself Man Friday. He was Malcolm's Man Friday, his personal secretary, who opened all of his letters and correspondence from Africa and the Middle East. I knew Luqman. In fact, I interviewed Anas Luqman, or Luke, also known as Luqman Abdur-Rahim, who is the Nation of Islam member that was sent to wire Malcolm's car. I have him on videotape for the first time, recounting how he was approached to do that and all of that. Okay, so I knew these brothers. Okay, from the time Malcolm was sat down, right after his chickens coming home to roost speech, December 1st, 1963, to the time that he ultimately broke with the nation, March 8th, 1964. In that time period, all right, he was trying to be restored, get back in good status with the nation. And I see your point is, if he's already kind of shedding himself of these beliefs, then why does he want to stay? Mark, it's
that ain't a small thing.
It's just not that. And I've heard some of their intellectuals, their ministers make this very point, right? That that he wasn't principled or whatever. Many people say then when Malcolm learned about Elijah Muhammad's illicit relationships, the women that he was having with these female followers in the movement, these young women he was siring these children with, that his faith was dashed, and he started to talk more. You listen to his sermons after he really got the truth of that matter. His sermons became more political and less religious. And Malcolm took a more pragmatic approach to it, which was to say, look, this is one of the most powerful Black organizations that's ever been built. Okay. And if it can survive this man's failings, it should. It shouldn't be totally dismantled or destroyed. You know, if in time the son Wallace will bring the people to the real Islam, the Orthodox
That was
Islam.
gonna be my next question. Okay.
Right? If we can pragmatically kind of just wait it out, wait the old man out. Malcolm himself never wanted to be the leader of the Nation of Islam. He wanted, Wallace, Muhammad.
Really? Never?
No, I don't think so. No.
When I read Manning Marable and his very important book, not perfect by any stretch, but important. There's a way that we see a flash of ego in Malcolm and a vanity in Malcolm that obviously you don't get from his own autobiography. You ain't gonna find vanity in my autobiography either. And when I see it, it started to make sense to me that Malcolm did want to lead. And that's not a criticism of Malcolm. It's just, if I could see, if I was leading Philly, top of the clock, 12, if I'm leading 7, if I'm leading this mosque and this mosque, if I'm the national minister, if I'm the face and the spokesperson, and I knew that there was going to be a successor, I can't imagine why Malcolm wouldn't think that he should be the next person.
Mark, Malcolm certainly wanted to help whoever would be the next man up, but that's not a role that he sought. He was a man who liked to go out and talk to the people. He loved to visit the college campuses.
That's true.
He loved to organize. He was a man of action. He wasn't going to be somebody sitting in Chicago. That's an administrative
role too. That's an
administrative role stuck in an office. He was a speaker, man. He was an activist. He was a man of action. He never wanted to. In fact, let me tell you something. The only reason he agreed to do the autobiography of Malcolm X was he was trying to dispel that notion. In fact, that was the charge against him that was being leveled against him by Elijah Muhammad's children and the administration in Chicago, the officials in Chicago. That Malcolm, that's why, and in fact, that's one of the tactics that the FBI used to create hatred against Malcolm.
Right.
To plant the idea in the media that Malcolm was trying to, ascend to the leadership. In fact, 1963 Savior's Day, the only Savior's Day convention that Elijah Muhammad was not able to attend. He wasn't well. He had, bronchitis and whatever. He was in Phoenix, Arizona. And so Malcolm was allowed to run that entire convention, which was only for one day that year, because they were trying to squelch all the rumors about the children, and the scandal that was brewing. They didn't want the scandal to migrate to all the cities where the Nation of Islam had temples. So they only had the convention for one day. And Elijah Muhammad himself allowed Malcolm to run it. The children did not like that. They did not like seeing Malcolm sitting in Elijah Muhammad's seat, literally driving Elijah Muhammad's Cadillac, getting involved in the affairs of the quote unquote the family. They used to call him Smart Malcolm, Mice Malcolm, and they were literally calling Phoenix, complaining to Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm said this, Malcolm said that. Okay, but Malcolm himself, yes, he had an ego, for sure he did. Absolutely. I mean, what man of his caliber doesn't? Right. We all have ego.
Negroes at Union Station in DC with a milk crate talking to 4 people that got ego. I mean, he's a giant.
Yeah, one of the baddest orators America has ever produced. Yeah. His speech, The Ballad or the Bullet, was ranked by a group of scholars of American rhetoric and oratory of the top 100 speeches in the 20th century. The Ballad of the Bullet is number 7.
Right.
This is a man who had no college education, a man whose education was books. he said, self-educated, autodidact. So yeah, he had an ego, but also keep in mind too, his income was based on the nation. He had nowhere to go. He didn't have any kind of career path outside of the nation, other than some speaking engagements and what have you. So he was trying to figure it out. So the reason the Nation of Islam, these people said he was trying to come back after March 8th. He was not trying to come back. Okay, after March 8th, April 8th, 1964, he took his shahada at the Islamic Federation. We have that document.
This is another interesting point, right? So you said April 4th.
April 8th.
April 8th, excuse me, of 64, sorry. Yeah. He takes his shahada. Now, he stood up in prison. He became a member of the Nation of Islam. He was in prison 46, so it's not exactly clear when he was officially a member, but would you say about 48? Would that be accurate, roughly accurate?
Yeah.
Give or take?
Accurate. Yeah.
So from 1948 to 1964, he identifies as Muslim. He is Muslim. He declares his faith. Is this like one of those, I don't know, I don't call it purifying, but how did he understand Shahada in 64 if he had already stood up and declared his faith in Allah and the Messenger? Was that like the definitive rebuke of the Nation of Islam, or was there something else going on? I'm trying to understand how he makes sense of that in 64.
Well, by 64, he was very seriously studying traditional Islam. He was on his spare time, he was going down to the Islamic Federation. He was meeting with Dr. Mahmoud Sharabi, who was giving him books and teaching him, how to make salat and how to say the prayers and the Fatiha and what have you. But he was doing it quietly. He was doing it quietly. And what's very interesting, Mark, is very interesting. And don't let me forget to tell you about the tape, because they rely on a tape. There's a tape that's been circulating for years of Malcolm essentially pleading with Elijah Muhammad to come back. Please allow me. I could not have.
This is the basis of my question. Is that
I know it was. I never got around to it. It's like, there's a tape that's been out for many years where and it's online, so you can listen to it, on YouTube or what have you, of Malcolm pleading with Elijah Muhammad, saying, "There's no way I could have done what I did without believing in W.D. Farad, believing that he is God, and so on and so forth." Okay. He was trying to come back. But by March 8th, see, by that time, he wasn't out yet. See, he was being silenced, right? He couldn't speak. And so he was writing letters to Elijah. He sent these tapes. Now, I agree. To some extent, I have to agree, and I've reached this conclusion that there is a disingenuousness in it.
Yeah, this is a business decision.
I mean, we have to be honest, right? Yeah. We have to be honest. Okay, we have to be honest. In his own autobiography, right? Wow, great minds think alike, right? Yep. In his own autobiography, he said that once he learned about Elijah Muhammad's children and all of these women that he was having these children with, right, that he sat down with Wallace, Elijah Muhammad's son, who by this time had, totally repudiated his father's teachings.
Right.
And they said, we have to come up with a way to protect the nation from this type of information leaking out. It will surely leak out. The following will lose their faith. They'll fall away and the nation will be destroyed. So we have to formulate a new doctrine that will allow the members of the Nation of Islam to continue, to follow Elijah Muhammad and to accept what can only be called corruption and hypocrisy. And and what they came up with, this is doctrine of a prophet's good deeds outweigh his bad deeds. That's going to be the new teaching. A prophet's good deeds outweigh his bad deeds. In other words, when you
Noah gets drunk.
Noah got drunk in the Bible, right? Lot
Right.
supposedly laid down with his own daughters. They said that David sent the husband of Bathsheba to the front line, right, to be murdered so he could have her, and so on and so forth. Okay, now these are all claims that the Quran and Islam rejects, but be that as it may, they took this from the Bible mostly, right? This was going to be their new doctrine. Right. And so, yeah, I've always struggled with that as well. But what it really boils down to is Malcolm had a good motive. The motive was to protect this organization, right, from the failings of Elijah Muhammad. And in fact, Malcolm threw out he threw out the olive branch. And I'll tell you why. Listen to what I'm saying, because this is very important, because we receive this information in a disaggregated way. All right. And we don't really understand the chronology. April 8th, 1964, Malcolm took his Shahada at the Islamic Federation. We have that document. But then he's going to give his second Ballot of the Bullet speech on April 12th, the day before he makes, right, his pilgrimage.
Yeah.
He had already given it once, the first time at the Corey Methodist Church on the 3rd, right, in Cleveland. That's really the first time. That's recorded as the first time he delivered that speech. The Ballot of the Bullet speech that you hear most often online or whatever is his second version of that speech. The first version is almost inaccessible. I mean, I have a copy of it, but it was very difficult to get. You can barely hear it anymore.
Yeah,
it's in Malcolm X Speaks, right? That's the version of Malcolm X Speaks, but that's not the version that you hear online. Okay, right. Somehow it's been taken out of circulation. But on April 12th, 4 days after he took his Shahada at the Islamic Federation, accepting Orthodox Islam, and he gives the Ballot of the Bullet speech, listen to what he says. This is in Detroit now. He says, I'm still a Muslim. I still believe that, Elijah Muhammad's solution, to the problem is, I'm the best solution. And so he pays homage to Elijah Muhammad. The exact words, I mean,
but the political program, he doesn't make a declaration of faith.
Yeah, but he says, I'm still a Muslim. And he pays homage to Elijah Muhammad. He doesn't say, in other words, Mark, here's your point. He doesn't, after he takes the Shahada, he doesn't go out blasting Elijah Muhammad. He's a false prophet. He's a fraud. The things that he was saying, like let's say February 15th, the day after his home got firebombed, you know what I'm saying? And he's not even a man, much less a divine man. He's running around with all these young women. How can you be, 60-something years old and you got all these young women? Right? He's blasting, he's spitting fire, right? But when he broke, even though he no longer believed in that creed anymore, he no longer believed in that doctrine, he still was paying homage to Elijah, right? He didn't repudiate him. And then he went on his pilgrimage. So, the whole situation was quite fluid. And that's the point. But no, the answer to your question, where this all began, is Malcolm was not trying to come back to the nation. Yes. Not at all. There's so much evidence that there's so much counter evidence to that it's ridiculous. And I'll get into that if you want me to, but let's continue. There's a mountain of evidence that Malcolm was not coming back to the nation.
People are going to have to take one of your courses to get that level of depth and detail. And I want people to do that because what you offer, when you teach on Malcolm is incomparable. I want to cover just 2 more things before we go, because I know it's funny. As you were talking, like, this is how our conversations end up being 2 and 3 hours long on the phone, because what one question at one point goes so many interesting places because there's so many dots to connect. But I'm thinking about this book of Malcolm, autobiography of Malcolm X, and let me say something just for anybody watching this who Malcolm X is my hero.
Mine too.
I don't know who I would be, how I would be, if I would be navigating the world in the way that I do. If I hadn't encountered Malcolm's legacy, Malcolm's tradition, in this book, the autobiography of Malcolm X, it literally changed my life. My son is named Malcolm, who you just met a little while ago. You know, I don't know what else I could do to articulate this. So any criticism or question even that I have about Malcolm is never an assault or an affront to his character. It's always me trying to understand how the person I admire most made sense of a world, partly because I want to make sense of it. I want to figure out how to do some of this stuff. And so the reason I bring that up is because my introduction to Malcolm was this book. All of us, right? I mean, I read this book, and again, I haven't been the same since. When I read this book now, after reading other books, after studying history, after, you know, looking at the notes that you all leave in the back of y'all projects, I have to think about this book in a different way. This is a narrative, but this is not even, I would say, an earnest attempt to narrate history. You know, there's political work happening, there's religious work happening at the beginning of this book. And I know you know this better than anybody, and I want you to talk to the people about this. This book happens in stages. And when Malcolm is first writing this book, he's in the Nation of Islam. And as you pointed out, part of the book, as I understand it, when Doubleday had it, was an attempt, it was almost like a testimony. You know, and again, the Nation of Islam very much is bound up in Christian practice, Christian tradition, right? In almost every way at this point, at this moment in history. And it seemed to me that he was showing how the transformative power of Elijah Muhammad's program and of Islam as they practiced it could take somebody from the depths, the dregs of society. You could go from being Satan, you could go from being a pimp, you could go from being a pusher into being this extraordinary figure that Malcolm was. And so it seemed like in order for him to do that, he had to overstate how bad he was, in order to make the story bigger. I don't think Malcolm was lying. I think it's part of religious testimony in the church tradition. You know, you tell these big stories. I met a dude in jail once that told me he sold nickelbacks. Everybody was Tony Montana when they locked up, right? We all tell these big stories. And then as time goes on and he's struggling with it, now he has to reconcile the big stories and the big claims he made about the minister, about the messenger, about the nation, with how he's feeling now. And the reason why I think about that, when we were talking about his faith, I'm looking at this chapter Saved, and I never could make sense of this, right? When Malcolm X is in prison, he's writing to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He's embraced the faith. He's praying, and then he has what he describes as or I would describe as a theophany. He describes it, sounds like a theophany. He said, "It was the next night I lay on my bed, I suddenly, with a start, became aware of a man sitting beside me in my chair. He had on a dark suit. I remember. I could see him as plainly as I see anyone I look at. He wasn't black and he wasn't white. He was light brown skin, an Asiatic cast of countenance, and he had oily black hair. I looked right into his face. I didn't get frightened. I knew I wasn't dreaming. I couldn't move. I didn't speak, and he didn't. I couldn't place him racially other than I knew he was a non-European. I had no idea whatsoever who he was. He just sat there. Then suddenly, as he had come, he was gone." He's describing his encounter with Master Farad Muhammad, the man who the Nation of Islam argues appeared to the Asiatic black man in North America. Something's got to give here. Either he, and to his point, he's never met Master Farad Muhammad. So either he saw Master Farad Muhammad, in which case we all got some explaining to do, or he didn't. Or he convinced himself that he did later. Or he's using it for the story. Because even in the movie with Spike, they replaced Master Farad Muhammad with Elijah Muhammad for narrative purposes, partly because he just wasn't a character in the film. But I also had to think through that. So I guess my question is, when we see moves like that, stories like that, what is happening? What is Malcolm attempting to do with this book? That's the question. What is Malcolm attempting to do with this book when he tells us things like that?
Well, he had his own motive for agreeing to this book project. Okay, Alex Haley had his own motives, and Malcolm had his own motives. By the time Alex Haley approached Malcolm to write his life story, Malcolm was already in some trouble in the Nation of Islam. Okay, it was the spring of 1963 when Alex Haley approached Malcolm about this project. Alex Haley didn't know that Malcolm was in trouble. Malcolm already at this point knows about Elijah Muhammad's women and children, these relationships and these babies. He's certainly already talked to Wallace and everything, and they tried to disseminate, at least Malcolm did. He tried to disseminate the new doctrine that a prophet's good deeds outweigh his bad deeds, right? But it backfired on him, all right? He thought he was revealing something new to these ministers, mostly on the East Coast, right? Louis X, who was Louis Farrakhan, Jeremiah Shabazz in Philadelphia, Lonnie X. Cross in Washington, D.C., Captain Joseph. He thought that this was like some secret that he was protecting, right? But now he's going to share it with these ministers so that they can promulgate the new doctrine. Come to find out, they all knew about these children. They knew all of this. They knew Elijah Muhammad had women. They knew he had children, right? It was no secret to them, to the ministers, right? But what they did was they stabbed Malcolm in the back. And they got on the phone and called Elijah Muhammad and said, Malcolm is sharing your personal business, your domestic life with the followers. He's trying, he's trying to disrespect you and take you down by spreading, all of this information, right? And so Elijah Muhammad summoned Malcolm and said, you go back and you put those fires out that you started. So Malcolm was in a lot of trouble in the Nation of Islam already when he took on this book project. But Alex Haley didn't know that. The reason he took on this book project was to shore up and to prove his commitment and loyalty, to Elijah Muhammad. Because at this time, the ministers were spreading the propaganda that Malcolm was trying to scandalize or trying to take down Elijah Muhammad by spreading his personal business. So Malcolm agreed to this project to extol the power of Elijah Muhammad, his teachings, right? That he would reform, that I'm a nobody and he's everything. You see? Right. Yeah. That was what he took on the project. But as the project evolved, 63, 64, right? He's not in the nation anymore. So now, in fact, Malcolm and I have gone through at the Library of Congress in the manuscript division the records or the file of Ken McCormick, who was one of the editors at Doubleday. And you will see Alex Haley writing him letters that after Malcolm breaks, and all of his energy was different towards Elijah Muhammad, and he wanted Alex Haley to go back and rewrite those early chapters. And Alex Haley said, "No, we can't do that. That will take away from the power of the narrative. No, we can't do that."
That's fascinating for all you literary scholars, if you're watching. I mean, or just people thinking about literature and narrative. I know some of y'all are like, where's the truth in all of this, right? Like to me, if I said, you know what, actually, there's some stuff early on that wasn't true, I need to fix it. To me, I should, because I'm telling the truth. But for Haley, there was a different truth he was looking for, and I don't mean that in the Donald Trump way of like, new facts, new evidence, or whatever, Kellyanne Conway way. I mean it in the sense of he was trying to craft a narrative of who Malcolm was at that moment as he's navigating the Nation of Islam, and he didn't want to erase that. He wanted to make it very clear that Malcolm was an acolyte of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He was a a spiritual son of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he himself felt the need to craft this book like an old school Christian conversion narrative, that I was at my worst, I was at rock bottom, and he picked me up, dusted me off, and cleaned me up. And I get that. There's some other things about the autobiography. I know we got to run in a second, but there's so much in here that's interesting, right? And Manning Marable's book gets at this, whether it's how his father died, or his mother's condition, or how big of a drug dealer or hustler he was, rather. Again, I can live with these contradictions and tensions. It doesn't mean anything to me, but I do wonder if there are so many tensions and contradictions here and there. It does make it harder to say, well, it's true because Malcolm said it.
Well, brother, look here. Let me make this easy, okay? Let me make this easy. First of all, this whole question about his vision of Farad Muhammad. It's possible that Malcolm may have seen a picture of Farad, and the
Just didn't realize.
And they did have a photograph of him, a highly doctored photograph of him that was circulating. So it's possible he saw a picture of Farad, and then he envisioned him in a dream or whatever. That's not a big deal for me. But what your audience should realize is that the autobiography cannot be read like a historical text. Okay. For example, we know from Malcolm's criminal record, he was arrested on 4 different occasions. All right. The autobiography only mentions one arrest.
Right.
Okay. The burglary ring. Right. And even then, it doesn't mention the 2 counties that he was arrested in. In the autobiography, there's only one trial. There was actually 2 trials,
right,
in 2 different counties. All right. You think Malcolm only had, this guy Shorty? Even the Shorty character is a composite character. Okay. This book is crafted. It gives you, the rudiments of Malcolm's story. It's very powerfully constructed and written. We're learning now, and more is going to come out, that when the book was turned over or sold to Grove Press, because Doubleday did not publish it.
Which is crazy, by the way. Everybody, just so y'all understand, Doubleday, when Malcolm dies in 1964, I mean, at the bookseller in me is like, let's put this book out. Doubleday did not want to put the book out. The book, Malcolm dies in February 1965, excuse me. The book's supposed to come out that October. Doubleday didn't want any parts of putting out a book on Malcolm X. They thought it was too controversial, too dangerous. That might be the worst move that might have been the worst business decision.
The worst decision in publishing history.
Gotta be.
The worst decision in publishing history. It's never gone out of print. It's a classic of American literature, not just African American literature, American literature.
Yeah.
But changes were made, and there's a scholar by the name of Keith Miller. He's a white gentleman, emeritus, University of Arizona, who has got some revelations about what happened to the book once it was sold to Grove Press.
Oh,
yeah.
I've never heard of it before.
Oh, yeah. There's going to be some more coming out about that. But in the final analysis, though, I mean, the autobiography of Malcolm X, it can't be read like just a straight history, like the way we do history. You know what I mean, with the straight chronology, and it can't be read that way. It can't. It's not that.
If it's not history, if it's not, I don't want to call it fiction.
It's closer to a memoir. It's not a memoir because it purports to go over his entire life. Right. Memoir normally will just take out a segment of a person's life.
Right.
But it can't be read like an academic biography. It's not that.
Yeah.
And it's too much detail to go into in a short show like this. Once you take my course, I offer from time to time on the autobiography of Malcolm X. I go into this great detail, who all these people were, who Laura was, who she really was, the black woman that he spurned for the white woman,
right?
Whose identity was shrouded in mystery. There's so many details and so much editing that went into that book. It's a highly edited book.
Right.
I mean, there's members of the family that don't like me saying that. They get really bent out of shape when I say that. But that book is highly. Let me just share this with you, okay? I'll give you one example, and then you want more, you have to take my course. But I'll give an example of what I'm talking about. When Malcolm's father is killed, right, in the trolley accident, that, you know, Malcolm,
allegedly by the Klan, right?
The Black Legion,
right?
Which was a Klan-like group, okay?
Right.
Malcolm paints a picture of his poor, struggling mother, right, grieving the loss of her husband, and Malcolm says something like, you know, I just looked at my mother and she's thinking, how is she going to raise all of these 8 children? Okay. Yeah. How is she going to raise all of these 8 children? And then even in fact, early in the book, he talked about his mother and his father raising 8 children. The fact of the matter is, the historical record tells us that Earl and Louise Little didn't have 8 children. They had 7 children. Louise Little, his mother, had 8 children.
Right.
Malcolm's youngest brother was really a half brother. It was he was the son of the man that his mother met several years after his father was killed. But Malcolm, right, not wanting to kind of reveal, you know, his mother's,
being protective of his mother.
He's protecting his mother. He's conveying respectability on her. There was a stigma on unwed motherhood, right? And he's protecting her, so he's attributing her last child to his father, Earl Little. But that's not Earl Little's son. Okay? And in fact, it took until the latest biography by Les Payne before we even knew that man's name. His name was Page, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay? So we didn't even know that man's name. But so it's things like that. The way he portrays his sister Ella, who was a character. I mean, Ella was a real piece of work in real life. Okay? I mean, and it's no, I mean, the history, it's in the books now, you know, had a long criminal record, many arrests, right? But you don't see any of that. You never property in Boston and what have you. You never learn how she got the property. You never learn what did she do. How did this young woman, Ella was only 26 years old when she came to visit them in Lansing when his mother was in Kalamazoo State Mental Hospital. She was only about 26 years old. She was already on her 3rd husband. She was working on her 3rd husband, who she met when she made that visit, Kenneth Collins. All right, her last husband. That's how she became Ella Collins.
That's the name I know her as, yeah.
Right. She met her husband, Kenneth Collins, her 3rd husband, when she made that visit to look after her half siblings, who she believed were being raised by white families. That's what bothered her. She was a Garveyite too, like her father.
Right.
And she was really disturbed that her half brothers and sisters were being raised by white people, which they were not, by the way. They were given, the only one being raised by a white family was Malcolm. The other ones were given to African-American families.
Gotcha.
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
We gotta, I'm looking at the time. We only have like 2 minutes.
Okay.
But, and I appreciate your time and value your time. I gotta ask you the question I intended to start with. We just got somewhere interesting and kept going. Who is Malcolm X to you? Who is Malcolm X to you?
Malcolm X is, he's a great leader. He's one of the most articulate, courageous voices that Black America has ever produced. He's an honest man. He's a man of integrity. He said that if I'm to be remembered for anything, let me be remembered for sincerity, right?
Try not to cry, man.
You see, the thing is, I'm just reminding you of things, all these things that you know. If I'm to be remembered for anything, I want to be remembered for being sincere. He said, even when I was wrong, I want you to know I sincerely believe that. Right? But he had the courage to change and to always interrogate his beliefs, right? And his philosophy. 3 days before his assassination, he said, and this is in the autobiography, he said, right now I'm man enough to tell you that I can't put my finger exactly on what my philosophy is, but I'm flexible. Okay, so he was a man. He was a man who was just an average brother, sister like ourselves, you know. And he rose himself up, as he would say, out of the mud, and he made a huge impact on our struggle, and he paid a price for it with his life, and we honor him for that. And he's going to be next year. He's going to be 100. He's 99 tomorrow. Or his birthday, or when we air this. I don't know when you're airing this, but
it's for those, we're recording this on Saturday the 18th. It's going to air on Sunday the 19th. It's on his birthday. We want people to see it on his birthday.
We're going to see it on his birthday. So when this airs, he'll be 99 years old.
Oh my God.
And he's a great leader, and we love him. And he was taken from us way too young, but, you know, Allah knows best. May he be blessed with the greatest and the highest place in paradise. And, you know, his legacy is secure. And I feel grateful and gratified to have played a role in bringing his name before a younger generation.
I have nothing to add to that. You summed it up beautifully, my brother. I'm always overwhelmed when I think about who Malcolm X was. And I think the beauty of his legacy for me is that we know he's not perfect. He didn't have to be. But he grew, and he changed, and he evolved, and he matured. And as he did, he became more courageous, more honest, you know, more committed. He's a model of what's possible. And I'm so grateful to be in community with brothers like you who didn't do a small part, did a huge part in helping us know who Malcolm is. And the more we know about our dear brother, the more we love him, the more we appreciate him, and the more we honor him. And so I could not be happier that you have been our 7th annual Radical Malcolm X Symposium keynote speaker or keynote conversation partner. It's a blessing to have you. It's a blessing to hear. I could have talked to you for 3 more hours, brother. Seriously.
Oh, easy,
man. One day we're gonna do something because this,
we didn't even get to the hard stuff.
Not even close. Not even close. But my brother, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Tell everybody where they can find you, where they can access stuff. I know Netflix, they can get the documentary, but I want people to take these classes with you. Where do they go?
I'm going to be launching the autobiography of Malcolm X course again this summer. All you have to do is reach out to me on my website, Abdur-Rahman Muhammad.com, and I'll let you know when we're going to be launching that. Also, I'm preparing now for Malcolm at 100. So if you'd like to, invite me to your organization or your campus for that year, again, reach out to Abdur-Rahman Muhammad.com. Also, I'm on Instagram, Arm Legacy, at Arm Legacy, and we'll see you then.
All right, my brother. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everybody, thank you so much for joining me. Hit the like button if you haven't, because the like button is what YouTube needs to let them algorithms know that independent media matters too. So smash up those likes. Also hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so. Also hit the little bell next to the subscribe button to make sure that you get up to the minute updates of all the content that we put out every single day right here on the channel. And if you're so inclined, hit the join button. You can become a monthly subscriber to the channel. It gives you exclusive access. It gives you exclusive material, but most importantly, it helps you support independent grassroots media. This channel functions from you. There's no billionaire writing a check. There's no corporate outlet underwriting it. This is all us, the people, building something different, building something special. So please, if you can do that, we appreciate it. If not, if you can't make a monthly commitment, consider using our social media platforms and our Cash App, our Zelle, PayPal, or Venmo as a means of making a one-time payment. If everybody watching right now, if everybody looking at this video right now were to contribute $5, just $5 right now, we would meet all of our media goals for the week. So please, if you can support, please do. But support isn't just financial. So if you don't have the money, we understand. We still love you. We would love for you to just hit that like button, but also subscribe, share the content, and spread the word to everybody that the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel is a place for independent media, and Night School is your nightly stop for deep dive conversation.